Hello everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my video discussion in which I try to answer the question, are expensive IEMs better? So of course, better is subjective, but I will take you through my perception of better and have here a whole bunch of IEMs, guys. I have here 10 IEMs. It does make for a nice picture. I mean, starting with the blonde HBB Z300, which is $35, only $35. That is a cheap ass IM, a cheap IM by any standards, if you ask me. All the way up to the Aroma Audio Jewels, which are among the most expensive IMs on the planet. They go for $5,130. So let's just say $5,200 or $5,100 to just, round it up. So 35 all the way up to 5,000. What differences will you get if you spend more money on IEMs? Because a lot of you will think that, diminishing returns kick in at different price points. So for some people, diminishing returns will kick in at the Dunu SA6 Mark II because this is hyped by a lot of reviewers. A lot of people I know love the Dunu SA6 IM so much that they think that they cannot do better after this price point. Well, I beg to differ. I didn't give the Dunu SA6 Mark II a glowing review when I reviewed it. But a lot of people recommend the Dunu. I mean, if you want to get the Dunu, the Pen-On Fan 2, which is $280, half the price of the Dunu, I feel like could be the point at which diminishing returns kick in for you. This is a fairly complete IM in tonal and technical performance. I really like it. I have a review of this coming up. And maybe this will have the review of the Pen-On Fan 2 will have dropped by the time this one comes out. But guys, diminishing returns is of course real. I mean, I have played a $35 IM and a $5,200 IM for 5 people in my circle of friends, and 4 of them thought this was better. One said that they're equal. Of course they're not equal, but what I'm saying is your hearing might not be able to sort of appreciate the difference between the two. Or your lack of experience, and that's fine. On the other hand, you might be a newbie who immediately picks up on these differences and can even pick up on differences between, let's say, a Xenon 6 and an Aroma Audio Jewel, $4,000 IM, $5,200 IM. There are things that the Xenon 6 does better, but overall I do think this is superior IM. So that's that, guys. Okay, so what happens when you go up the price range? What do you get for your money when you pay more money? In general, as you go from the blonde set ZE300 or Z300 rather to, let's say, an $84 IM, which is the Let's Shore DZ4, which I really liked and I dropped a very positive review of. Or when you move up the higher price points and you go up to a $220 IM, the QE Ears Quintet, and then you move up to the Fan 2 from Pen-On, or the Dunu SA6, which is a $580 IM, or you come all the way to a $1,000 IM, the Symphonium Helios, which is a wonderful IM, or the Sennheiser IE900, which is $1,500. And then you go to $3,300 with the Campfire Audio Trifecta, or $4,000 with the XE6, and then finally the $5,200 Jewel. What do you get? So the improvements are not on a continuous plane, right? It's not a straight line. It's a squiggly line. By that I mean, some people might prefer the DZ4 over the QE Ears Quintet. I know I did because of tonality. Tonality is something that's very subjective, guys. You might like a Harman Target IM, in which case you might not like the Campfire Audio Trifecta. In fact, a lot of people who are on the value end in terms of whether they buy value IMs or people who sort of, champion value IMs, the reviewers who do that, might even hate on this because this tuning they will call wonky. And it's not a traditional tuning. But in general, when you move up the price point, the price change, you do start getting more colorful tunings, for the lack of a better word. Like all these IMs, with the exception of the Jewel perhaps, like these 4, especially these three are highly, highly colored IMs. Especially when you compare them to Dunu SA6 Mark II, or let's say even a blonde HBB Z300. Like, these are highly colorful tunings, ambitious, artistic takes on what an IEM should sound like. So you do start getting into this more colorful territory, which might not be your jam, because I do think, and I'll not mince words here, I do think it requires a certain amount of audiophile maturity to look beyond a graph and not think that a graph is what there's a target for what a graph should sound like. I'll talk about graphs in a separate video and why I think graphs are critical but misleading, and why graphs have been handled very poorly by a lot of reviewers. I'll talk about that in a separate video. So graphs are useful, guys, because by looking at the graphs, you often get a sense of what an IEM should sound like. With the IE900, it does to some extent sound like it graphs. With the trifecta, it doesn't for a lot of people, and it doesn't for me. In fact, I have seen two graphs that are widely divergent for the trifecta. With the Xenon 6, the graph doesn't make a lot of sense because it does have kinetic bass, so there's a huge open port through which bass leaks out. So the graphs looks obnoxious and atrocious, but this is one of the most popular IEMs among the flagship IEMs, and it's for a reason. Anyway, so when you get to the higher price points, $1,500, $3,000, $4,000, you start getting more interesting tunings that people, as a matter of fact, might even call wonky. And for the use of such adjectives, what happens is a lot of people who play in the lower price tiers think that, okay, it's not worth it. Is it worth it for me? Definitively. I mean, I would take these IEMs, especially these two, over most IEMs on the planet. Why? Because I find them supremely exciting, supremely resolving, supremely everything. Like the bass impact of this, coupled with the treble sort of presence, the way this plays Metallica, nothing else can. Like when I play And Justice for All, the riffs on this IEM are euphorically heavy in a way that I expect them to be in real life. This IEM is just so 3D with this bass ventilation system. This IEM is so resolving and so wide in its soundstage that I'm not going to get this level of quality. In general, what happens is, although it's not a straight line of improvement, guys, because I do think that the Penon Fan 2 is a wonderful IEM, but the Kiwi Ears Quintet, which is similarly priced, is not so great. Like I do think the DZ4, which is a cheaper IEM at $84, I would take it over the Kiwi Ears Quintet, which is, like I said, a $220 IEM. Like I do think the Symphonium Helios, which is a $1,000 IEM, I would take this over the Sony's IR Z1R, which is a far more expensive IEM at $1,600. So you do get value at lower price points. However, if you have to sort of look at the overall trend of what happens when you go higher and higher in price points, you do get better resolution. You get better technical performance usually, and I think it's mostly typified by resolution and separation. Resolution and image separation start suffering when you go to the lower price points because these IEMs don't do separation all that well. Like this Blonde Z300 sounds very clustered, very mushy, very unclear, very compressed. However, if this is all you've heard, this will sound magical to you because it is a very good IEM. Like 4 years ago, if someone gave me this before I started the hobby, because it's still much better than most TWS earbuds out there, I would be like, wow, you've changed my life with this. So there's still utility, of course, in the cheaper stuff, but you do get a clear uptick as you move along the price graph in terms of, number one, resolution usually. What is resolution? That's just simply the information you're able to retrieve from tracks. And I know there are people who even debate on resolution. There are people who think resolution can be figured out from the graph, which is just nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I would love to sit down with them and understand how they think these 2D graphs work. A graph of amplitude over, how a graph of amplitude works without any sort of time axis, etc. Over frequency, amplitude over frequency, which is what a frequency response graph is. But anyway, you do not get a sense of resolution from the frequency response chart, and no amount of digging into that chart, whether you come up with a moving average or what have you, or you start computing gradients, I mean, you won't be able to come up with the sense of resolution from a graph. That's the limitation of that graph. So resolution definitely improves. So it's in the tangibles you start getting more for your money. You start getting more information from tracks. Some people even debate and say, no, you cannot get more information from tracks. To them, I have nothing to say because you do get lower level signals, more ambient cues, a sense of the venue in which this track is being performed, clearly separated out imaging. So if there's a male and a female vocals, you'll get such clarity and separation between the two, especially if you move up to the Jewel, that you'll start understanding what that means. You could well be someone who doesn't care about these differences, and then all power to you. You won't be an audiophile. I mean, I'm kidding. Of course, anyone can be an audiophile, but you could be someone who doesn't care about these differences, or you could be someone who doesn't hear these differences. If you're one of them, I feel sad for you. But no, I mean, that's your right. I mean, if you're not able to make out differences, then that's fine, I guess. I mean, I love the fact that I'm able to hear these differences, and that's one of the things that gets me up in the morning to try new gears. I mean, this is not my profession, of course, so I do get up in the morning for my job, but I do spend an inordinate amount of time in the hobby. I love this hobby, and these differences make my day. It's nerdy, it's trivial to a lot of people, it's expensive, but I love it. I like it. It's subjective. This hobby is meant for pleasure. I love picking out differences, which is what I review. So you do get these differences when you move up the price graph. You do get a better sense of spacing and layering. You do get better technicalities. It's mostly in resolution, etc. The other thing you get that's also not reflected on a graph usually or mostly or completely is improvement in timbre. Timbre is something that I think you have to sort of understand. If you play a Jewel, for example, you'll understand how natural these IEMs sound, because very often these IEMs do not sound natural. The lower price stuff, because they'll sound metallic or plasticky. Like this is a highly rated IEM at $220, but this timbre was off-putting for me. I just didn't like how realistic or not unrealistic it sounded, especially let's say in cymbals. I didn't even like how the rhythm guitar sounded or distortion pedal sounded. It didn't sound right. It sounded highly reproduced and very digital to me. But then again, I'm spoiled by the more expensive stuff, so I would say that the timbre of the Sennheiser, even despite having a very strange V-shaped graph, not strange, I love the V-shaped stuff. So see, for me, IEMs are different flavors, guys. I need this in my collection. This is V-shaped done right, and I love the bass impact, the treble energy of this on days I'm at the gym. This has a definitive use case for me, and the way this plays back rock and metal is not something that I think I can get with any of these other IEMs, with the exception of perhaps the Trifecta and the XE6. So this has its place, guys. This is far more neutral, and although this is fine for rock and metal, I love vocals with this. The treble quality of the Symphonium Helios is just stunning. I love female vocals with this. I love acoustic music with this. So this has its place. So different tunings for different folks, for different occasions, for different genres. You cannot get one tuning that works for every genre. Thank you. So as you move up the price points, you also start noticing other improvements. I think treble is what improves the most, because the lower price stuff often don't do treble very well. The treble often sounds very metallic, very glary, not sparkly, not sparkly in the sense that it's sweet and realistic sounding, but glarish and often sibilant and sharp in the sense that it does sound a bit poor quality. But then you move up the price points and you start getting treble that is just so fluid, and even if present, just so well extended and airy and sparkly. Treble quality is very difficult to describe. A lot of people who play at the low end of stuff are frightened by treble, but they still end up listening to a lot of poor quality treble. But a treble quality does improve as you go up the higher price point. Like this has really high quality treble. This has just some astounding treble. And the Jewel has some beautiful treble as well. The Jewel is a pretty safe tuning, so that's worth keeping in mind. But if you really want to get into treble quality, this $1,000 IEM is just a master. It's very extended, so that's the first thing I want to talk about. So it's a function of the frequency response. However, the tuning is done in such a way, the driver tech and the drivers of such a higher quality, and the internal circuitry is of such a higher craftsmanship and quality, that the resultant treble that you get is not going to be sibilant. It might be present, and you might not be able to handle the treble here, which is fine. But I find that up in the higher price categories, you just get a more realistic, extended, yet palatable, and I want to use the word sweet, treble. You also get better bass. Like the bass you're gonna get with these three, you're not gonna get with lower priced IEMs, guys. You're just not gonna get very good bass at the lower priced IEMs. The impact will suffer, the bass texture will suffer. Bass is complex because it's not just about impact. You can have this hump on a Harman curve, and you might think that that takes care of bass, but for me it doesn't, because for me, how a note of a bass guitar or a drum decays is very critical. That to me is what makes the bass sound realistic. The texture, the finer nuances in that bass note are important for me. To be able to hear the pluck of a bass guitar properly, the strumming, and the after effect, the linger is very important to me. To me, the amount of impact and how the impact sounds, because sometimes, like I talked about this, if you take a Susvara, which doesn't have a great bass, and if you EQ it, the Susvara bass is pillowy, and EQing is not going to fix it, because it's just going to sound like you're slapping the pillow with more force. On the other hand, an Abyss AB1266 has tremendous bass. But even though the Abyss has more slam, I find the Focal Utopia's bass to have just a little more texture in the slam. The slam sounds more realistic. So the same happens with these IEMs. This dynamic driver bass is just fantastic. It does have a hump, some bass shelf, but the quality of the bass is just phenomenal. The slam sounds realistic. So there are these nuances in bass, like texture, like decay, like the quality of the impact, the overall mid-bass or sub-bass balance, which again is a function of the frequency response. So it's a combination of frequency response, the driver check, the quality of the dynamic driver inside, other technologies that are being used like the kinetic bass here, which all make for a very, very interesting bass performance. This is unique because the kinetic bass here is, to me, is better than even like the Legend Evo type of subwoofer bass that Empire Ears turns out, because although that has a more higher sub bass shelf, this never fatigues me. The Empire Ears stuff used to fatigue me. There's a way in which they do this overpowering sense of bass, sounds very fraternity floor like if you're listening to, let's say, EDM or hip hop, or the bass is engulfing you, but it's just not fatiguing. That's the sort of trickery you can get when you spend more money. So bass and treble do improve. I do not think the mid-range improves drastically when you move up the price points. The mid-range of all these IEMs, I'm not a mid-head, so that's worth keeping in mind. So mid-heads might disagree, but mid-range is what it is. I feel like, yes, it does contain most of the music information, like vocals, like guitars, and of course I love mid-range. But you do not get a markedly better mid-range if you go from let's say, a Dunu SE6, or even a Pen on Fan 2, all the way up to, let's say, an XE6. Like the Jewel does have very famous mid-range, so Jewel is a bit of an exception. It's very unique in its mid-range timbre and its realism. But in general, the Pen on Fan 2 has some of the best mid-range I've heard, and it's only $280. The Dunu SA6 has some of the best mid-ranges I've heard. It's only $580. And when you move it all the way up to, let's say, an XE6 at $4,000, you're not going to get a markedly better mid-range. So the mid-range to me doesn't scale as much as the bass and treble does when you go higher up in price points. So I'm nearing the end of a review, guys. My points are, you do get better technical performance as you move up the price point. You do get better resolution and separation. You often get better treble quality as you move up the price curve. You definitively get better bass if you look for better bass in an IEM. Not every IEM that's expensive will have better bass, but you do get IEMs. You're likelier to get better bass production in more expensive IEMs. The best IEM for bass sub $1,000 is a Madhu Type 512. Okay, so that's it, guys. If you want to ask me where does diminishing returns kick in, I mean, that's highly subjective. Some of you have posed that question to me. For some of you, diminishing returns might kick in at $35, guys. It's subjective, and it depends on your pockets, how much money you want to spend, and how critical a listener you are, and your preferences. For some people, the diminishing returns will kick in at Fan 2. It's a fantastic IEM, and if had I never heard better IEMs, I would have been very happy with this. It plays back everything in my collection really well. I highly recommend this IEM, by the way. For a lot of you, the Dunu SE6 Mark II is basically where the diminishing returns actually kick in, because this is a hyped up IEM. Not my favorite. I don't like the BA bass here. I just can't deal with BA bass, guys, for the most part, with the exception of Symphonium Helios, which does have extraordinary BA bass, which doesn't sound like BA bass or dynamic driver bass. It just sounds like something of its own. For some of you, this might still do the trick if you don't care about BA base. This to me is a realistic endpoint at $1,000 because Symphonium Helios does have extraordinarily, resolving tendencies. As a matter of fact, I would say the Helios is more resolving than the $3,000 trifecta. But just because the Helios is more resolving than the trifecta doesn't mean that my argument about getting more resolution in higher price points is thrown out of the water. It's discardable. Because for the most part, you do get better resolution as you move with the price point. The Helios is an anomaly. It's a wonderful anomaly in the fact that this is so resolving. My friend, Golden Sun, has actually said this is more resolving than most transducers he's heard. So I know where he's coming from because this is really resolving. And this to me is like a baby subtonic storm almost. And the trifecta is not particularly resolving for its price point. That's also worth keeping in mind. So this is a fair point of diminishing returns for a lot of people because it's very technical and it does have great tonality. Some of you might find this a bit too present in the treble, so that's worth keeping in mind. I love it. It's a thinner sound and I keep it as a flavor IEM. It's not exactly neutral in my eyes. Nothing is. So that's basically where I'm coming from, guys. You get better bass quality. You get better treble quality. Mid-range, not so much. Mid-range does plateau earlier, I think, in quality. You get better resolution and separation as you move up the price points. So I, for one, do recommend that instead of spending a whole bunch of money on cheaper stuff, if you can get a higher price IEM and just, be done with the hobby, that's one way to approach it. I would approach it that way if I had to sort of, budget myself more stringently. Because I do think higher price IEMs are, to me, better. Technically better, and I do appreciate the more tuning adventurousness that often goes hand in hand with higher price stuff. That's it for me, guys. I hope this was useful. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not, and stay tuned for my next one. Bye-bye.